this is, before I talk about me, as you can see, I can do this, and I actually did this for Red Nose Day. I did it for 2 hours, but 2 hours is too long for someone like me, but then I'm also obsessive. That's another problem, so I'm going to actually put that away. Now, one thing, I might be telling you some things which possibly will shock you. I'm not out to shock, and I'm not going to talk about what I talked 2 weeks ago. And I had my daughter present, I had my father present, my brother-in-law present. Anyway, very, very interesting. I was just chatting to someone who has something to do with this event. And I said, and so he says to me that he's an exhibitionist. So I said, well, yes, I'm an exhibitionist too, not like you. Now, of course, what do I do next? I go into the gents' toilets. As soon as I finish, I walk straight into the ladies. Isn't that a wonderful place for someone like that to go? Unfortunately, or fortunately, thank God, I've never gone down that road. But it is because all the time I'm constantly being bombarded by sensory issues. It's like all the time, I don't know how to filter out difficult thoughts, but I was shown a way to do that. And I'm actually not going to be talking that much about me. I'm just going to try and cram about me into about 5 minutes. Then we're going to move on and talk about mindfulness, talk about music, talk about things that could actually benefit you, benefit your children. Now I want to ask, how many parents are there in the room? Can you put up their hands? How many teachers are there? Now, how many of you are autistic? How many have got Asperger's syndrome? So, an unfair question would be for me to say, how many of you, we're losing Asperger's syndrome as part of the autism spectrum. And of course, I might say to you, I'm autistic, but really and truly I'm not autistic, I've got Asperger's syndrome. Although I might have started life off being autistic, right down to the very bottom of the spectrum. So this is what I do. I was diagnosed when I was 49 years old, and what you're going to be seeing in a moment is an edited page out of my diagnosis, which can tell you a little bit about me 10 years ago when I was diagnosed. Now, lots of people say to me, Laurence, you can't be autistic, because you can look into our eyes. What they don't realise, autism, anxiety, are a moment away. When I was a child, I had a terrible relationship with the dinosaur T-Rex when my mother used to put me to bed. As soon as I couldn't go to sleep without the lights on, I would look in the drawers, under the tables. When I was 54 years old, I had a tap. I was cycling along the canal. I imagined there was a Tyrannosaurus in front of me. I crashed my bike, almost fell into the canal. I actually had to go down on my knees and cover my head until the sensation passed. So that is some of the things that I've had to deal with autism. Of course, I spent most of my life not knowing what it is. In fact, I spent most of my life in therapy from the age of 3. On a weekly, then monthly, then bi-month, monthly or whatever. At 8 years old, and then from between sort of 12 years old and 16 years old, and then from 25 onwards until I was 54 years old. I was going, actually not 54 years, 49 years old, until I learned about my diagnosis. I was going to a psychotherapist to try and find out how I could control these difficult thoughts in my head. And I'm going to show you how that's possible. Now I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this is a page out of my diagnosis. There it talks about me having poor eye contact, bad joint attention behaviour. I was terribly bullied, but not necessarily by other children, but by teachers. Teachers who didn't understand that fidgeting was down to ADHD. I still have problems with ADHD. I might turn the gas stove on and leave the gas on. You know, something that happened a couple of weeks ago was actually my 60th birthday, and I've actually brought with you my diagnosis for anyone of you who wants to see my diagnosis. And also, my sister made a wonderful book about my life, and it tells of wonderful things I used to be able to do, like I was a brilliant piano player. So autism, in some respects, was a bit of a curse for me. I can't play the piano now. I used to be able to play the piano, tenor horn, double bass, trumpet, you name it. I could actually pick up any instrument and just begin playing, even though I didn't know how. And I was brilliant at maths, just like in the film Rain Man. So this tells you, now very, very interestingly, we're going to go on to a little bit later about this Rory Allen, who is a research psychologist, and he does a lot of work in the field of music, and he actually been recently working on a program which he invited me to be involved in called alexithymia, and that is particularly present in people who've got, when I'm saying people, I'm generalising, it could be children, it could be adults, but he works specifically with adults who may get angry, they may get sad, frustrated, exasperated, all the different types of emotions and feelings, but they don't know why. But what he has found that music is absolutely brilliant, but we're going to go on to that in a moment. So you can actually come onto my website, and we'll be going on to that in a moment as well, and see links if you want to read up about Rory Allen and what he does, and some of the things that I do with him as well. Now, also, there's an article that The Independent did a major article about my life last summer. However major it was nothing compared to what I talked about 2 weeks ago at the London event, talking about exhibitionists and things like that, talking about the very, very difficult natures. You know, at the moment, we're hearing in the media all the time. You know, this is just a couple of cuttings out of papers. You know, there's so much about all these people who are older than me, who are getting themselves into trouble, and the police are going back 50, 60 years into their past. And some of that actually scares me. I've been there. I have been there with people who have abused their power on me. Why? Because I'm autistic, I'm gullible, I'm naive. I believed everything they told me. And I would do everything that they told me, even though I wasn't enjoying what was being done to me. And it's memories like that that I've had to learn to cope with. And I'm going to be showing you in a very short space of time how I was able to learn to cope with. All of you in this room can do it very, very easily. You don't have to have any qualifications. You don't have to really, it's something that really comes natural to you. So we'll go on to it in a moment. Now I'm going to talk about mindfulness, how a life coach helped me get over all my difficult stuff. He taught me in a very, very short time how to live in the now, how to observe all the difficult stuff that was going on in my life, and what I found was negative traits in my personality and character suddenly dissolving as though they weren't there. Now, why are you looking at this page? This page is a former website of mine, and how he actually helped me, he got me to relate to the weather in the sky as being the weather in the mind, just like the weather. You tell me, I want anyone to put up their hands to tell me that a weather forecaster can get it right with the weather. Is anyone, oh, we actually have, that's interesting. Well, is this possible? I won't knock you. Anyway, so what he said, there's a similarity between the weather in the sky and the weather in the mind. We can't stop ourselves thinking what we think. So he said, just Laurence, I want you to imagine that you're not labelled with Asperger's syndrome. You're not labelled with ADHD, and your mind was completely free of any of your labels in life. And when I first went to see him, I only saw him on 2 occasions, although I spent a lot of time with him professionally because he helped me build the website, taking advice from him. And it was quite remarkable. So what you're actually seeing here was trying to design a mind which is full of a lot of anxiety. So you can actually go onto my former website, which is called lifewithoutLabels.co.uk, and you can see this page. There are 4 different pages there's 4 different states of mind, going from this one, and if you were to put a cursor over, say, addictions, and I've had plenty of them, so I know, or even rage. I've even sampled rage. Don't like it one little bit. Thank goodness I have it in control. But again, it's emotions like that that can be a moment away. So this is flowing mind, and this has taught me how to really adjust to all the difficult thoughts, all those sensory issues that I have to face on a day-to-day basis. So what he was saying to me, just imagine, just be mindful of clouds as they go from one side of the horizon to the other. And that's all they're doing. A rain cloud might come along, even a thunder cloud, but we don't know how long it's going to remain. But if you can learn, just observe what's going on and not allow yourself to get drawn in. So that's really what mindfulness is about. But I made a dreadful mistake. And I made it because I'm autistic. So this is another curse of autism. I believed that anything was possible. I believed, because of what he taught me, that I could actually rid myself of autism. It would be, I remember watching one of the episodes of Star Trek where Dr. McCoy is in a hospital. They've gone back into time. He pops a pill into someone's mouth, and suddenly that woman's without dementia. So the pill cures dementia. So you imagine a pill that could cure autism. Perhaps you'd want a pill that could cure all the negative, the side effects, the detrimental effects that autism does, but not necessarily all the positive things, the wonders that our autistic children, autistic adults can actually do, can actually demonstrate. Just now remember, I used to be lower functioning autism. When I was 4 years old, I refused to go to a toilet other than the one in my house, so my mother had to knock on doors. When I used to walk along the road, I had a routine where I was going like this. It might look funny now, but that's how it was. When I was a child, it used to drive my mother up the wall. And I got humiliated once by the headmaster. I got punished. One of the things I used to do, I used to stand facing the wall. And, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Oh, it's the wrong one. So we're going to go on to this at the moment, which is a website of mine. So it was through mindfulness and working with this life coach that I was able to deal with all the sensory difficulties, all the difficulties I have on a day-to-day basis. Now, talking about being an sorry, I'll give up saying that word. But I could have one of my attacks as I'm standing here. Just talking about some of these people who are, I did have the right pages, but you can see it doesn't really matter. I'm just using the newspaper as a metaphor, right? And the point about it is, right, I have been there where I've been struck on a daily basis can happen many times in a day. Now there is something which I believe is responsible. Now I'm going to get out this wonderful bag. I'm an antique dealer, that's my main profession. I've made a lot of money in my life. I've flown around the world. I used to commute, and I did it for 10 years, to New York once a week. Sometimes I used to go twice a week. So I've actually got on in my life, and I'm not exaggerating, 12,000 flights. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But it's true. I've even got the receipts to prove it. So I'm actually going to pour onto the floor basically sweet wrappings. Now, 10 years ago, right, that is actually 6 months of sweets and a few bits of healthy food that I would consume in the car. I would get hold of crisps, you know, chocolate and what have you, right? I could go through 10 pounds of it in money in 10 minutes flat, just stuffing myself. I'm controlled. That's why I tried today to not be on sweets. So what's very important, when I was talking last time, I had my life coach along, I had my nutritional coach here as well. Diet is so vitally important. If you want anything to work for your child, if you want things to go smoothly, it's very, very important that you get the diet right, you get the nutrition right, you get the sleeping right, you get the drinking right, keep away from salt, all sorts of things. These are all very, very important. Now so what I did, I actually created this website called lifebeyondlabels.com, and there's a tremendous amount of information on it. What I'd like you to do is actually go to that website when you've got access to it, because there's something I would like you to do, which I'm going to be talking about just before I end my speech today, which is going to be very beneficial to anyone on the spectrum and to parents and to teachers. Very, very important. So I created this website. Again, I did it with my life coach, and I also did a lot of work, you'll see, with a music psychologist. And on this website, all this website is really about how it's actually developed. It's about, and it's really the ultimate therapy. Before I get onto it, I'm now going to talk about something that I didn't want to forget. Well, how many of you as parents and teachers go through the most frustrating time with your children and pupils? Put up your hands. So how many of you don't ever have any problems with your children or pupils? Good. That's what I like to see. What's vitally important? You know, scientists already know that a baby in a room will pick up on an argument that a husband and wife, partner are having. Perhaps this also will say whether a child is going to be autistic. Now I can actually show you, because I've got a picture in my book, how I spent my first couple of weeks of life. I was born 6 weeks premature. So you can actually see me, my mother's looking at a photograph of me in an incubator. Does that have something to do with autism? That I don't know. I can tell you something else. I as an antique dealer was writing about the 18th century man called Augusta Strong. He was so obsessive. He was only interested in himself. He wanted to be the richest man in the world, have the most amount of possessions in the world, and he would actually exchange people to get those possessions. Didn't care about people, except perhaps he had OCD. So I'm covering quite a lot of ground, and so what my website is really all about is a therapeutic website. It's looking at how we label people, and it's how getting you to choose the labels that you want for your children, for adults, or whatever. And it's all about music, so this is really what I want to come on to, mindfulness and music. So this is Rory Allen, and in this particular interview, it was all about a beginner's guide to how music can really benefit the autistic child or the autistic adult. And this is something you can do. If you were to join my website, you can create a musical wall, and you could see how a child, a pupil at school, an adult reacts to music, and you can actually record and play it back and create a music wall. That's what part of the website is very much all about. So in this particular one of the questions, the first thing he actually says, and I think it's on this video, there's actually 5 other interviews that I did with him that are all on my website. The first thing he says that a mother and a teacher should really know exactly about their autistic child, right? But from what I'm hearing, lots of teachers don't really understand autism and children, but mothers do. So the mother is the best judge when it comes down to. Now, one of the things I forgot to talk about at the very, very beginning is a word called commitment. Now, of course, everyone wants to get married, have children, and what have you, but I wonder how many would-be parents are very aware that mother might be giving birth to an autistic child or a child with disability. It takes a lot of mental strength and courage to be able to stay married, and even if something goes wrong in the marriage, to be able to give support. Now tell me, are you all committed to offering unconditional support and love to autistic children? Now put up your hands. Good. And that's what it really takes to be a parent today. It's not so much about your autistic children. It's a complete package. What happens when they are growing up? What happens when they go in the outside world? How are they going to support themselves? And this is where it gets very, 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 very stretched, and there's not enough support, not enough funding, but I'll go on to that in a moment. So on my website, this is some of the things that you can do. Get help with teenage emotions, all the things on there that you can actually, if you go onto my blog, onto my website, you can actually learn about all of this. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Oh, I didn't realise it's the end now. Anyway, so now I'm going to talk about music. Music is by far the most powerful benefit of all time. We listen to it every day. Where music helps me is that, and perhaps because when I was young, when I used to walk past the home of Jacqueline Dupre on my way to the bus stop, and I used to stop and watch her being taught when she was a child. And wonderful, when I was in my teens, I wanted to be an opera singer, and I studied music in a very, very big way. But a very nasty music teacher unfortunately put a stop to that. She didn't like my attitude. She had no, of course, you've got to understand, I didn't know anything about me being autistic, and I'm using autism or being Asperger's until I was 49 years old. No one did. So I couldn't get any support. Not at all. You know, I had problems with my siblings, I had problems with my parents, my father. God help me, my father didn't like me one little bit in my teenage years. Not from the fact that I was actually going through difficult times, but he couldn't cope with my behaviour, put it down to behavioural problems as opposed to being autism or ADHD, which I'm also diagnosed with. So this is what I mean. It's so very important and vital that bringing up children, raising a family, is all about support on both sides. Now, going back to, if you're going to have an argument with your husband and wife or partner, or you're going to have an argument with any of your other children, do not do it in front of an autistic child. Don't even have the argument at home. Do it elsewhere. That child, an autistic child, and maybe I'm generalizing, is liable to pick up on it all too easily. I can't say for certain, but perhaps you're going to be doing that child a lot of emotional damage. Music, on the other hand, calms the mind. what music is able to do. It's very, very interesting. If I went back to one of the other slides, what Rory Allen directed me to, and I spent a lot of time in America going to the major conferences. One's called IMPAS, called International Meeting for Autism Research. And I've been to there several times. I've met Simon Baron-Cohen, had discussions with him. I've met all sorts of different psychiatrists, but there was one man in particular I got to see. His name is Anurag Patel, and he works out of the San Diego Institute of Neuroscience. And his interest in was how music, was foreseeing that maybe music in 50 years' time, now I'm going to dare to say something which I shouldn't say, could even be used to cure cancer. Imagine that. But just imagine that what music can do. It can take a child, an adult, it can actually move them out of one emotional state into another. And music is amazing. Now you can go onto my website, and there's to really get the benefits of lifebeyondlabels.com, you've actually got to go onto my website, right, and register and build walls, and you can upload to YouTube. I could actually, if anybody wants to come up to me afterwards, they're welcome to see some of the things that you can do on the website. That is so easy. All you have to do is a YouTube link, and you take your music video, movie video, whatever it might be, and you can create a wall full of music. I do it all the time. And so what Anurag Patel said was, where the cure in music is called the chill factor. What the chill factor is, and we all go through it, it can happen most often, actually, at the pictures. You'll sing an amazing scene, it's mind-blowing music. Like at the moment, I'm actually playing music in my head as I'm speaking to you. And suddenly, all the hairs on my body, they're intense, I start sweating, get goosebumps. This is known as the chill factor. So what this scientist is doing with his team is finding a way they can actually capture this chill factor and use it as a prescription. Just imagine that perhaps not in our lifetime, but in our children's lifetime, they wouldn't need to get an injection to do away with an illness or disease, but they would get a prescription of different types of music. That would be an amazing prescription without any side effects, guaranteed to work. So, does that sound plausible to you? I'm just curious. Anyway, just getting onto my website, or rather just before I go onto my website, I've also written a book which is a book of fiction. It's called A Dangerous Marriage. It's about an autistic man and his relationship with his conscience, and it goes very, very deep inside of the autistic mind. It's based on real life events, and I'm hoping the book is going to be published next year. Now the other thing is something else I am doing. I'm launching the most important funding event that the world of autism has ever seen. It's going to be, it won't take place until 2015 at the earliest, but it's going to be raising as much money as Save the Children. So we're talking about millions of pounds, and I'm not exaggerating. We've already got the infrastructure in place for it to actually happen. We've been talking with certain organisations. But I've got a problem, and this is where I need you to help me. One of the problems I've got, I wish I could have a charity and to help everyone, to help support adults in need, support education, but I've got to choose something like either research or support. So what I want you to do is to go onto my website, that is www.lifebeyondlabels.com, register, and just all I'm interested in to register, then I will be able to set up an email to you and ask, all I want to know is where, if someone said to me there's £10 million available, because that's the kind of money that I'm talking about, £10 million, and where you would like that money to go. So, all I'm asking you to do is to register on the website. That will help me enormously, because it's going to probably take the best part of 12 months for me to have discussions with the right types of organisations to set this all up and going. That's why things can often take 2 or 3 years to actually happen, but I intend it to happen. So anyway, one of the great things about mindfulness and music, and how it can be very, very, very beneficial to children and adults, even you as parents and teachers, it can take you out away from anxiety, it can take you away from all the difficulties that you might face with your relationship with your pupils and your children who have autism or other mental disabilities. Now, what I'd like from you now, I'd like to actually finish talking, but get, if possible, some sort of audience participation by asking me questions, any questions. So if there's anyone who's got any questions to ask me, please fire ahead.
When you got your diagnosis, age 49, were you happy that you got your diagnosis, and did you feel a sense of relief?
I was very happy because I was able to go to friends and families, so friends, business colleagues, and say, do you know how rude you used to think I am? Now you know, it's because of this called Asperger's syndrome. And when they asked me what Asperger's syndrome was, I was able to tell them. But I couldn't continue using it as an excuse, so I had to learn. Even today, I'm still rude. I still do things all the time. This is where mindfulness comes in. I can be mindful, I can step back, I can allow myself time to observe before I respond.
You talked about when you were 4, were you low functioning autism, is that right?
I actually don't know. Because I was diagnosed when I was 49 years old. If you saw, I got my full diagnosis, you could actually make up your mind whether I was diagnosed with as Asperger's syndrome, with ADHD and limited motor abilities.
Could you talk at 4? Could you talk at 4? Did you talk at 4? You did?
I did. Although I did have to go to elocution lessons. I couldn't say the, I used to say the and things like that.
Okay, sorry, I thought it was you diagnosed with low functioning.
When did you first get told that you had Asperger's?
Oh, this is actually something, this is very, very interesting. This is something that I actually forgot to talk about. I'll go back to the stage and talk about it. Very, very, I'm glad you raised that. When my wife was, she was watching this documentary. We're actually more interested in one of my children than myself. And she was watching a documentary when I was 47 years old. And she rushed into the room and she said, Laurence, I think you've got Asperger's syndrome. And I said, don't be ridiculous, possibly our son has, but not me. And so I said, well, give me some examples. So she said, you know, when we first got married and you proposed to me, we had a big argument a half an hour later. And why did you argue? Because you just rushed straight through this elderly couple because they didn't exist. And then she talked about how when I used to take the children to McDonald's, I used to enjoy playing games, like throwing chips around. So I was embarrassed, I was an embarrassment. She wouldn't refuse to go to a restaurant with me. no, don't be funny. I had tantrums in the middle of Wales where I got out of the car in the middle of a field and she actually drove off and came back from me 3 hours later. But if you really want to hear a story which is true, I just tell you, I used to travel to America, so one particular year I would take her mother-in-law, we fly off to Miami and we check in. And this was another story that she reminded me about. In fact, it was a friend who reminded me about this story. Unfortunately, my wife also, committed suicide 10 years ago as well. So that's something else. But she has a history of which I didn't know about. So that's another thing which I'm actually going to talk about in a second. So we've gone to Miami, and then the following day there was a message for me to go to a reception. And I went to the reception. The message was that I should go immediately up to New York to do a business deal. What did I do? I just hailed a taxi, went to the airport, went to New York. 2 days later I returned. Have you got any idea what I'd forgotten to do? I'd forgotten to tell my wife, or her mother, or anyone. So they were absolutely furious when I got back. I didn't think about it, didn't even think I had to speak to them. So of course when they started, and perhaps that was the reason why they decided they didn't want to live in America. So that's how it started. And about a year later, I was actually visiting my mother's, and my mother was telling me about new neighbours that moved in. And I said, oh, I'll go and introduce myself. And she said, no, you better not. I said, why? She said, well, they've got sons who've got Asperger's syndrome. And it just made me stop dead in my tracks. And I said to my mother, well, do I have Asperger's syndrome? And she said, well, possibly you do, but we didn't know about it. That's how I then decided to go and get myself diagnosed at the Priory Hospital. Just talking about my wife, one of the things that I've had to endure, and it's also another thing I've had, why I had to go and see a life coach. I don't think I'd be alive today. I think I would have committed suicide. There were so many times that I stood on a platform in London and I thought to myself, just walking off in front of the train, no problems at all. And I couldn't do it. There's a very, very good reason. After my wife committed suicide, she was actually in another relationship. At the time, I had a daughter who was 11 years old. She unfortunately had to be sectioned off. The social services at the time, because I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, they decided that I wasn't mentally fit to look after my daughter. She almost got fostered off to another family if it wasn't for my personal assistant offering to actually be a surrogate mother. So that is the curse of autism. That is some of the things that I've had to live with, and it is memories like this that are often drowning me all the time. And it's learning about being mindful, just observing what's going on. So when I get an anxiety attack, I can just step back, not allow myself to be drawn in. This is very much what lifebeyondlabels.com is all about. It's about creating a wonderful environment for your children to grow up in. And this is what you should be focusing about as parents. Creating the ideal environment for your children. Because, and as I said to you before, it's about supporting them until the day you die. And that's probably the most difficult commitment of them all. So I've about now finished what I want to say. If there's anybody else who wants to ask me any questions. Does anybody else want to know about how music can benefit you? Oh, you want to ask another question?
How does music benefit you then?
Music benefits me because it moves me from one state. I do a lot of crying because of the amount of trauma that I've had in my life. To think that I've lost a wife who I very, very much loved, but she didn't like me as a person. I wasn't a nice person to be with. But of course, she had a mental history I never knew about. and I had Asperger's syndrome, which I didn't know about. So it wasn't a very, very nice relationship. It was a very, very strange marriage, although we have 3 wonderful children who've done very, very well for themselves. So whatever hell I've been through, and I still go through, I cry all the time, often listening to pieces of music, or with sad pieces of music. I love listening to sad pieces of music because it removes some deep trauma. The only trouble I've got to watch out for when I'm crying is when I'm in my car and driving along the motorway at 70 miles an hour. Do you know what it's like to suddenly have a fit of crying and controlling the steering wheel? I tell you something, it's not easy. I don't recommend it. So, anyway, I want to thank you very, very much for coming here and listening to me today. And I'm hoping that you got some benefit out of my talk. Now I've got a problem with clearing the mess up.